This episode of Lunduke Show is brought to you in part by System 76, who make fantastic little computers, including the one I use to produce this show, that all run Linux. You can find out more at System76.com, and Pogo Linux, who produce some of the most amazing servers I have ever seen on planet Earth that also are powered by Linux. They got Linux right there in the name of them. You can find out more at PogoLinux.com and Lulzbot. Lulzbot, you say? They make 3D printers. That right there is the Lulzbot Mini. I love that 3D printer so much. I use it to make all sorts of crazy things. That little tiny Game Boy looking thing up there, made that using a Lulzbot printer. See that little mask over there? That was printed using a Lulzbot printer. I've got a whole spool of different kinds of material back there, including that little brown one right there. That's made of wood, at least in part. That's awesome. And you can print that using the Lulzbot printer. You can find out more over at lulzbot.com. Today, well, let's just dive into it. Today, I want to continue my nerd prep series. I started this some time back, and we got a little sidetracked with some other projects and some crazy things happening. But it's time to get back into it. When you are preparing your world for what it's like in the, let's say, apocalypse, or just when the power goes out, or when the internet goes out, or when you're traveling and you don't have internet access. As a nerd, you need more than just to prepare your food or your water. You also need to prepare your computers. You need to know that your gadgets are going to be working well with maybe no power, maybe no internet. All sorts of things could happen, both short-term and long-term, and you gotta be prepared for it. So, this is part 3 in what I call my nerd prep series. Now, let's assume you have a server. Parts 1 and 2, go back and look over my my history in my YouTube channel or wherever you're watching these videos, and check out parts 1 and 2, where I talk about getting set up with a basic low power server. I use a Raspberry Pi for them, much like I do with like this little gadget here is a Raspberry Pi in a case. But you can really use any kind of computer for this you want. An old desktop that's been kind of retired because you got something new and shiny and fancy. Any sort of computer will really do the trick. I'm going to assume that your server computer, whatever it is, ARM-based, x86, whatever, is running Linux of some sort. In fact, we're going to be focusing on Debian-based distros during most of this, but a lot of this is going to apply to a broad swath of different distributions and different operating systems, and we'll get into that as we go. Honestly, this isn't too terribly difficult. But what we're going to do is walk step by step through the exact steps you have to do to set up your own local software repository. So when you boot up your system, whether it's running Fedora or Ubuntu or Debian or any other variety of Linux distributions, or in case you haven't upgraded to a good operating system yet, perhaps Windows or OS X, you are still connecting to someone else's server. Someone's server somewhere, whether it's Microsoft or Apple or the Debian project or all these other different projects or companies, have a server set up or a farm of servers that host all of the software and patches and security upgrades and just cool tools you can install via the internet. What if that internet goes away? So here's exactly how, assuming you're running a Linux distribution, you can host all of that locally. So if the internet goes away, not only can you continue to install software, you have all the source code for all that software so you can make changes, and you can host that software for other people, friends, family, neighbors in your community. You can set up a Wi-Fi hotspot and make that repository now publicly available so everyone can still get, say, the latest version of LibreOffice right from your local server. This is also really handy. This is handy in a large number of scenarios. So let's dive into exactly how you do this here. All right, so we're going to talk specifically creating your own Linux repository. Sorry, Mac and Windows users. This is hard to do for you guys. Upgrade. Install Linux or something. We're going to focus, like I said, on Debian-based systems, simply because that applies to most of you. I've spent most of my last few years running OpenSUSE. Very easy to do on that as well, and I'll show you how at the very end here. So, assuming you're on Debian or Ubuntu or Linux Mint or any of a variety of other, or Pop! OS of Debian-based systems where you have in your terminal apt. apt install, apt upgrade, etc., apt get, all the apt tools for installing software. If you do have those, you know what I'm talking about here. There are two simple packages you need to install here. The first is apt-mirror, and that really does exactly what you think it does. It mirrors whatever Debian style repository you want onto your local machine. And the second, and this is really an optional step, but I recommend installing Apache. So apt install Apache too. Just simply type those commands just like they are, assuming you're logged in as root. If you're not, do sudo before each of those commands and you'll be good to go. That'll install apt-mirror and Apache so you have a web server on your machine. This is important to have a web server on your machine, even if the internet's gone, because you can still have a local network or a local wireless network where you can connect all your various devices and machines to that machine to grab all of your updates. So you can have one machine that stores all of your repository files and upgrades all your machines. It's really handy. Once you've got those installed, what you're going to want to do is edit the mirror.list file. If you simply type nano etc apt mirror.list, it'll open it up. You don't have to use nano. Gedit, Emacs, VI, whatever you want to use. Any text editor is fine. It's a very, very simple file. A very simple file. What you'll see at the very top of that file is a set of configuration options. You can ignore all of them. As you get kind of a little more pro at this sort of thing, you can really fine tune things, but you can really ignore all of those. What you're going to be looking to change is this. Down at the bottom, you'll see a number of lines that look like those two lines at the bottom right there that have deb or deb-source that list a URL for the various repositories that you're fetching those files from. It's very, very simple. You can keep them generic if you want. Whatever distro you use, it might have a pre-configured set of repositories there for your distribution. You can keep those if you want. You can delete them all. You can add a whole bunch more. What I recommend is go to the distribution that you're using. Let's assume Debian in this case. So if you go to that URL at the top there, debian.org, wiki.debian.org/sources list, and that will actually list you out all the URLs to use for all the different sources, for specific versions of Debian. And this is the same for Ubuntu or Linux Mint or any other distribution. All you really need to do is go and grab those URLs. Now, if you're not sure about those URLs, there's an easy way to check that on your system that I'll show you a little bit later. What now? Now, totally optional, but I recommend grabbing not just the binary, the deb line there, but the deb-src, the source line there. And the reason is, if the internet truly is gone, don't you want to have the source code? Now, the downside of having the source code, this gives you the source code for all of those packages. Unfortunately, it gets huge. I mean, it gets mega, mega big. So we're talking, you know, for some of these repositories, you're not just talking about like a gig or two. You can be talking about, say, 100 gigs plus easily. And if you've got many, many repositories, that can add up fast. So make sure you've got enough space to store all of that. Once you've got that saved, very simple, run apt-mirror. Done. And let it do its job. Be prepared. This can take a long time because not only are you downloading all of the files from that entire repository. I mean, imagine that. You know how long it takes to just sit down and if you have a kind of a slow network connection and you install, say, LibreOffice and GIMP and Firefox and a couple other things, it can take a while if you've got a slow connection to your repository. If you're grabbing every single stinking file, it can take forever. Hopefully you've got a nice fast connection, and hopefully their servers aren't being bogged down. Hopefully. But it will automatically download everything. Maybe only take a couple of hours, hopefully, and it will take a ton of space. Expect it to take a couple hundred gigs. Just expect that. Hopefully it won't. Hopefully you'll just be talking 20 to 30 gigs for most of the repositories that you want or need, but it can take a couple hundred gigs. I've definitely have experienced that here, especially when you start talking about repositories for multiple versions of multiple distros for multiple architectures, which I will show you about in just a moment. Now, what's really cool is once you've run it once, the next time you run it, it will update. So that means it'll basically just go out and fetch the updates and just bring down what's changed. So that's kind of nice. So it won't re-download, at least I don't believe so. No, it doesn't re-download all of them all at once, but it does just re-download what's updated. It still takes a while because it's got to scan everything, but it's still not too bad. It's still pretty fast. A lot of space though, a lot of storage. So you're going to want to set aside some significant drive space for this, which is cool because once it's done, you've got the entire Debian repository on your machine. That's awesome, which means that if you're on your machine, going to install stuff can now be made to be wicked, wicked fast. But that's only really part of the solution, right? Because you also need, let's say I've got this server, right? Let's pretend that this little Raspberry Pi with this cute little tiny touchscreen on it is my server. Let's pretend that. And it's got like a little set of USB drives attached to it that I'm storing all of those repositories on. Well, I still need to grab all those files for my desktop here, for my laptop, for my handhelds, for everything, right? That really can be a problem unless you've got Apache up and running, or some other web server. It doesn't need to be a terribly complicated web server because honestly, you're just serving up files over HTTP. It's pretty straightforward. So here's what you got to do in order to easily make it so those files are accessible over a web server. So assuming you installed Apache. If you're on Debian, apt install Apache 2. I believe if you're on OpenSUSE, you're just going to be doing zipper install Apache 2. I believe it's still called Apache 2 on all the various distros, and Yum over on Fedora, what have you. What you're going to do is you're going to make a symbolic link that links together, that makes a link from the web root that the web server is looking at. So the folder the web server is looking at, which is by default, at least on most setups, /var/www, pretty straightforward, to the folder where you have the various repositories. So as an example, ln to create the link, -s, and then put in the full path to the folder that ApptMirror created for each individual repository, which by default, and this can be changed, but by default is /var/spool/app-mirror/mirror, and then / the full path for that that domain that you pulled that repository down from, and there you go. They get that full URL. This will then point, say, /var/www/Debian to the Debian repository you just pulled down. Really straightforward. So then, in your sources list, was I smart enough to put this in there? Yes, I did. You now want to go, once you've got that going, you're done. So then go over to another machine or your local machine and put in the URL to that server. Now, if you're on a local network, it might be something as simple as like 192.168.0.1, right? And you use that URL, that IP address. Even if you're not connected to the internet, you'll still have one if you have a nice little Wi-Fi router that you're all going through, or some sort of other hardwired router. And you want to go ahead and edit your sources list. You can do this through a graphical user interface, or you can actually edit the text file /etc/apt/sources.list. That's going to bring up a simple text file. And if you look at that text file, it's got a whole bunch of URLs that look an awful lot like which ones are they here? Like these ones. Look a whole lot like these ones. So you want to basically add a line for each of the repository that you created, except instead of the deb.debian.org or .ubuntu.com URLs, you'll put in your IP address or your URLs, and then you're really good to go. It's really straightforward. Where was I at here? There I was. Now, every time you go to update your software, go to add new software, you're going to hit your little Raspberry Pi on your local network, preferably just linked to via Ethernet, and you're going to pull down those files crazy grease lightning fast. It is awesome. I highly recommend it. It's great. So even if you're not looking to do this from a prepper standpoint, what's really cool about this, so if you have, let's say if you have an office with 10 people and you want to be able to update really fast and you don't want to use up a whole lot of your bandwidth during the day, set a cron job, which is a little utility. You'll have to look that up. Maybe I'll cover that some other time, to run apt-mirror every night at midnight or something when everyone's home in bed. Then you're always updating your repository stored locally, and then have every workstation on your network hit your local mirror of that repository. Lightning fast, doesn't use a whole lot of your outgoing internet bandwidth. It's a really, really nice way to go for a big business. It's highly, highly, highly recommended that you go that route. And even for me, if I've got 4 machines at home, right? And when I want to go install something, I want to install it on 3 of them, and I want to do so fast. Well, what if they're really big pieces of software? What if I'm talking about needing to pull down, 400 or 500 megs each? That's kind of annoying. And what if I'm streaming a bunch of stuff? What if my internet connection is not as great at the moment as I want it to be? If I've got it all locally and ready to go, again, lightning fast. Highly, highly recommended. This process is actually really simple on every Linux distribution. The process is a tiny bit different, but here's the cool thing. All of these systems are just serving up files over HTTP, which means you've got one Raspberry Pi server or one even just an old Pentium 2 sitting around doing nothing, or an old ARM box. Put a version of Apache on it. You can mirror OpenSUSE, Fedora, Gentoo, Arch, whatever, what have you, all on the same machine. You'll put them all in different folders, so you have like a Debian one and an OpenSUSE one and whatnot. But you can mirror it using the links here on the screen. For those of you listening to the audio version, I'll put links to this over on lunduke.com on the lunduke.com article for this. So you can easily go follow those instructions for their preferred method of mirroring the repository. It's really straightforward because basically all you're doing is just copying the exact folder structure from their repository down to your file system. Nice and simple. The one thing to bear in mind is the more, not just distributions, but versions of distributions and different architectures, CPU architectures for those distributions you add, every time you do so, you're adding a lot of drive space usage. Just as an example, I've talked a little bit about, I like these little pocket chip devices, right? These pocket chip devices are great. They run stock Debian. Well, if I'm running a Debian-based distribution here, and I'm running Debian on here, that's cool, but this is ARM, and this machine over here is Intel. It's an x86 CPU. So it's basically getting a whole completely new repository. So it basically takes twice the space, give or take, which is problematic. So you got to have a lot of drive space. I mean, that's really the key takeaway here, is that even though you can have multiple repositories for multiple distributions that are hosted all on a single machine, it takes a ton of drive space. Just got to remember that. Now, that's cool. That's all really cool. However, it's not just possible on Linux-based machines. This is possible on Android as well. And there's actually 2 options here. I'm going to go in detail on one of them. Well, this is actually pretty straightforward. This is really straightforward. If you have an Android device or many different Android devices, I highly recommend grabbing F-Droid. F-Droid is basically a package management software for Android. It focuses on only free and open source software, so you're not going to have all the stuff that's over on the Google Play Store, but that's fine. However, I'm not going to mention that. That's fine. That's totally fine. What you want to do is go over and use Repo Maker. If you go to F-Droid's website, they've got a link right to how to use Repo Maker. But basically, it's a web interface for setting up your own traditional F-Droid style repository yourself. And what's cool about that is then you can load whatever you want in there, and you've got your own repository. Now, in theory, you don't want to be going around having a repository with things that maybe you don't want to make super public, like maybe applications that are proprietary that you own the rights to, but you just want to make it easy to install on multiple devices internally. That's fine, but you don't want to do so publicly because you get into some trouble. So you got to be a little careful about all that sort of thing. But if you're sticking with free and open source software, much simpler. So I highly recommend that route. Repo Maker, go check it out. There's a link to the source code for it over on gitlab.com/fdroid/repo maker. It's worth checking out. The the other way to go if you're using F-Droid. F-Droid actually has the ability to share the APKs, the install files basically for your Android applications to anyone on your local network. This is really cool. So what you can do is if I'm here with my Android tablet and you have your Android tablet and we both have F-Droid running, and I've downloaded and installed, say, a game, some sort of like little dungeon crawler game or an emulator or a web browser. I can then share it and make it accessible, so then you can actually see it in F-Droid, download it straight from my tablet, and install it on yours. Really cool. So it's really cool. So even if you are without internet access, like you're out camping or you're off, on vacation, or you're driving around in a car and you want to, share, you're sitting in the back seat and the guy next to you has a tablet too, you can share it out as long as you guys can connect via Wi-Fi somehow. Awesome. Very, very awesome that functionality is there. But Repo Maker is a great way to go. So if you have the need to set up your own repository and put your own apps on there, you then have the ability to basically reinstall your system and re-download all your applications, bring your friends over, install all those same versions of same apps. Makes things very, very handy. So again, very, very simple. This really isn't terribly difficult, but it does take a little bit of planning because you need to plan ahead to have a solid server running somewhere. I recommend something very low power. A Raspberry Pi is great. Chip is great. Banana Pi is great. A bunch of the single board computers that are out there are just fantastic for this sort of purpose. And have some sort of storage that is preferably in some way redundant. So it's got some sort of a backup or mirroring. And then you can mirror down whatever repositories you want. It's really quite cool. I can't recommend doing it enough. I do that for any system that I'm using for any length of time. So like right now I'm trying out a bunch of different distros. I'm not taking the time to mirror every repository right now. That'd be ridiculous, right? But when I sit down and I'm like, you know what, this is the distro I use for my studio machine and for me and my wife's laptop. If that's what we're using, well, I'm just going to mirror it, put it locally, and just point everything at that, and then have my mirror auto update by running either app-mirror or whatever the equivalent is for any distro I'm on. Whether it's just running an rsync script or what have you, which we can talk about in a future one if people get confused by that. Updated every night, then it's easy. And then updates are fast and it's just delightful. It's the way to go, man. It is the way to go. Before we head off into the sunset, I would be remiss if I did not point out two things. The first is that over at System 76 right now, they still have crazy deals going on right now, including on the Wild Dog Pro, which is $290 off right now, or at least up to that point, which is the system I use to make this show. It's a fantastic, beastly rig. I absolutely love it. And the other thing that they added is they added, where is that at here? Yes. They added financing. So System 76 for the first time has financing, 0% financing available if paid in full in 12 months, that sort of thing. So if you're looking at buying you need a new machine and you can't afford one for a couple of months, oh, there you go. They've got that all set up there. Also, seriously, do yourself a favor. Go to pogolinux.com and click around. Why do you do that? Well, why would you do anything? Because it's cool. They have some of the most beastly machines on the planet. I mean, we're talking machines that are capable of petabytes of storage, machines with 8 terabytes of RAM. It is absolutely just monstrosities of Linux-powered enterprise-grade equipment. Can't recommend it enough. Good folks all around. They're over at pogolinux.com. All right. That's it for this third installment of Nerd Prep. Now, where we go from here. There's actually quite a few different things we need to talk about. And the next couple of ones is going to come in a very different order depending on which project I get finished first. We need to talk about powering our equipment, including our servers, in power outages. So we're not just talking about battery backups, but we're talking about prolonged energy solutions, whether it's solar, wind, etc. So that's kind of an important one, which means balancing different possibilities, like how do I make my machines as low power as possible? How do I produce as much power as possible? How do I make that whole rig, which is going to be getting more and more complicated, as small and as easy to maintain as possible, as well as keeping it cheap, because I'm a cheap guy. As well as I'd like to start getting into some of the more entertainment-y aspects as well. Various things like movies, books, music, video games, etc. in a totally apocalyptic scenario, which, you know, it happens, right? Stuff happens and you got to be prepared. Otherwise you don't have your gadgets. And if you don't have your gadgets, what's the point, right? What is the point if you don't have your gadgets? That's what I always say. That's my saying for the day. All right. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.